Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Sunday Sit Down. I'm Reverend Phil Dieke, and this is a little bit of a different setting. I am here, and if you've ever been on any of our Bible studies or a lot of the things that we do throughout the week, this is what you're used to seeing me at. And a little bit of an extra caution this morning. We're running a skeleton crew at the church, and so I'm actually sitting here in my home, in my front room, where I do all of my Zoom meetings, because we're just having a couple people in for worship this morning. So I am at home and worshiping from home, and grateful for that opportunity to stay safe. We know a lot of people traveled over the holidays, so we just thought, for an abundance of caution, we would just have a few people in the church. And so here I am in my front room once again. So I'm grateful for the chance to be here and for technology, and that we get to still have the Sunday Sit Down in a way such as this. So last week we came and we had Jenny Misslin join us, and she talked a little bit about spiritual resolutions for the new year. This week I wanted to turn a little bit toward the season of Epiphany and what we celebrate on Epiphany Sunday. Epiphany is actually January 6th, but we're celebrating it today with the idea that it's a Sunday before Epiphany. And you may be coming here having no idea what Epiphany is, and that's great. Or you may be a scholar and an expert and know way more about Epiphany than I do, and that also is great. I want to look at Epiphany through the lens of some of the incredible work that a colleague of mine is doing here in North Texas through the Human Rights Initiative. Bill Holston is joining me this morning to talk Epiphany through the lens of HRI. And so, Bill, thank you so much for joining me this morning.
It's a real pleasure. Thanks for asking.
Yeah, so we were chatting a little bit ago about trying to remember where we first came to know one another. And I do some work with Faith for Dallas, and I know Bill's been in a lot of places like that with our colleague Nancy Caston. And Bill's actually a member of Greenland Hills, correct? Up in not quite as far East Dallas as we are over here at White Rock.
Right.
And then just some fun Methodist connections and various things. I also heard you speak at the Conference of the Professions a couple of years ago, if you remember speaking there.
I did. That was. I had never even heard of that. That's an awesome event. I thoroughly enjoyed that.
The fact that they have lawyers, pastors, and what medical professionals
physicians, like the head of Parkland.
Yeah.
And Isabel Del Campo from Perkins was there, and yeah.
It's such a weird conglomeration every time I go to it, but I love it every time. They're talking about really important things and really cool intersection there. So I invited Bill because as I thought about Epiphany, I thought, well, I just really want to look at it through the lens of what HRI is doing. So I'd love for you to just introduce yourself a little bit. Let our guest, I kind of told you before, right? This is a little bit of our pre-worship warm up here. And so I'd love for our congregation to know what you're doing here in North Texas and the work of HRI. And then I want you to just share a little bit about what you think about when you think of Epiphany. And we'll talk about what Epiphany looks like through the lens of the work that you're doing.
Awesome. Well, I'm Bill Holston. I'm an attorney. I'm 64 years old. I've been our agency, the Human Rights Initiative of North Texas. We're celebrating our 20th year this year, and we do free legal services and free social services for immigrants. And we do that in a kind of a unique way, which is through a pro bono network. So we're the largest we've ever been in our history. We have 17 staff. 5 lawyers, legal assistants, social worker, case manager, but over 300 volunteer lawyers and other volunteers that do the lion's share of the work. So last year we did $2.8 million worth of free legal services for folks.
2.8 million?
Pardon me, $2.8 million worth of legal services. And that and it's in 3 programs: asylum, unaccompanied minors, and crime victims. So we represent asylum seekers, we represent children, primarily from Central America, but from other places, and women escaping domestic violence and violent crime. And we've been very successful in helping our clients get legal status here in the United States, and really more critically this year than the legal services were social services. So our clients, like most immigrant and other persons of color communities, were hard hit by COVID. They had lots of layoffs and reduced hours. They were hard hit with the disease of COVID. And so our clients had tremendous social service needs. So we've been working this entire time, even during shelter in place. Some of us were coming into the office, and we gave out over $300,000 of rental assistance through the City of Dallas CARES Act funds, and that's a lot of money for us. So it was that's really the most I don't know, a significant thing we're doing at the moment, because immigration courts have been closed. Although we continue to see people, we're doing, Zoom intakes, and we started doing in-person intakes as well. So we had to shift all our operations to, set up tables in the lobby and use actually in the front parking lot of our building, and bought some plexiglass shields and set up, masking protocols and cleaning protocols and all that. So, the efforts of the government to deport our clients have barely slowed down. So we have, I have to go in and get the mail. We get notices from the government that we have to respond to. And this has been we've been really, really busy. Nobody in my organization's been working on their sourdough bread recipe.
Well, first of all, a huge thank you for the work that you're doing, and for your entire staff and everyone at HRI, because I know a lot of us, we've either kind of throttled the back or had the luxury of being at home and working from home and that whole thing. So thanks to y'all for the extra effort. And like you said, like, the government's not stopping or slowing down and trying to deport people. And so it's making your work even harder, I'm sure.
Well, and to make it even worse is the government continues to pass policies. I mean, they're continuing to pass policies, making it extremely difficult for particularly asylum seekers. That hasn't slowed down at all. So we're having to keep track of all of those changes in the law and changes of procedure, and continue to represent people.
Yeah, well, we're working on starting a church and society group at White Rock, so I look forward to. We'll lean on you a little bit here as we try to get MPP
Awesome.
down.
Yeah, that's it's actually people got outraged, and the church got outraged about family separation, but which was of course awful. But the migrant protection protocols, I think, are actually the worst. I like saying I've been doing this work since the War of 1812. So I've been doing it a long time. It's always been difficult work, but the migrant protection protocols, which was this remain in Mexico, where asylum seekers are forced to wait in these squalid camps in Matamoros and these border towns, they've rendered it almost impossible for people that were, survivors of terrible violence, forcing them to wait in places where they were subject to cartel violence, kidnappings, and rape and murder. It's one of the worst human rights abuses I think our country has committed and continues to commit.
Right, and much less the fact there's a global pandemic and we're shoving all these people in very small places. Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's all of these detention. I just read a story. I think it was Friday of last week about a Guatemalan asylum seeker, and this is somebody who won their asylum case, and the government. This person was in detention, and the government appealed the case, and it's very difficult to win asylum. So this person won asylum, the government appealed the case, kept the person in detention center, and there was widespread COVID in the detention center, and these detention centers do not take it seriously and do not have adequate measures to protect people. And this person eventually gave up and returned to Guatemala, the country that he fled because of threats of violence and acts of violence, and went back there and wound up perishing in a motorcycle wreck. So this is I don't know. I sometimes feel like I need to apologize for telling such bleak stories to people because we don't like thinking about those things. But to be quite candid, it would be morally irresponsible of me to talk about what we do without describing exactly how awful our policies are and how inhumane they are. And I take every opportunity to inform people, and it makes people feel uncomfortable. And I'm sort of sorry for that, but not sorry, because
you don't have to apologize at all. I think the brilliance of that is that a story like that reminds us that these aren't just statistics, right? Like that these are actual people.
Absolutely.
And that's what reminds us that the work we have ahead of us is very.
I said this 3 years ago when people were asking me about what was going on, and I said, people are going to die because of these policies. and they have.
Right. Right. Okay, well let's shift a little bit and look toward Epiphany. And
Mm.
um first of all, I'd love to just hear your thoughts on Epiphany as a good Methodist. What are your experiences with Epiphany? And Mitchell has a thing here where he'll often refer to Sundays as sneaky good Sundays, and I think that Epiphany is one of those sneaky good Sundays where there's just a lot of really rich context with it, and great liturgy that goes with it, and as well as hymnody. But one of the texts I know we talked about earlier that you really resonate with, the work you do through HRI. So you want to share that text?
Sure, I do. This is, first of all, I've only been a Methodist. I grew up in Bible churches. That's where I met my wife. So I have a really not a long experience with the liturgical calendar. And that's something I've really enjoyed about becoming a Methodist, is getting way more connected with the liturgical calendar. I appreciate it. It's not stale to me because it's kind of new. And so when you and I were talking, I was saying, well, let's talk about the passages that are in the lectionary for Epiphany. And one of them, and I'm a big fan of the Psalms. I read the Psalms. I read them daily. And the Psalm is Psalm 72. In verse 12, it says, "For he will deliver the needy who cry out, the afflicted who have no one to help. He will take pity on the weak and the needy and save the needy from death." And then the most germane part for me is he will rescue them from oppression and violence, for precious is their blood in his sight.
Oh.
And, one of the passages that's always been very meaningful to me is Isaiah 58 about the true fast. It's like the true fast is, to lessen oppression. And so I think we Western Christians in particular tend to bifurcate justice work from worship. And we think of, singing hymns and prayers and going to church and those things as holy things, and then working in courts and working in law offices as secular things. But in my view, that I reject that dichotomy. And because working for justice, working against oppression is an act of worship. It's an act, it's a holy act.
Yeah.
And God values that. The psalmist says that, it's the precious are the blood of people.
Blood in his sight. I know, that's a great line.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is.
I remember talking to somebody one time. We were talking about social justice, and it was a group of people who weren't very familiar with the Bible. And I said, there's this great book you can read that's got a lot of information about justice and fighting oppression. They're like, "Oh, really? What is it?" I went, "It's called the Bible."
They're like, "What? No. Isn't it just full of God who's all angry and like vengeful and stuff?" Yeah, no, there's in both the Hebrew scriptures and the New Testament, right? Like both of them. Yeah, that's a good word. And I love that you brought that to the attention, because when I think of the Epiphany text, I typically go to Matthew, and you have like King Herod, and you have these wise men from the east and all this kind of stuff, and there's a lot of great things to pull from the gospel text too that fit in line with this, right? And especially with the idea of asylum, because we're told in Matthew, right, like we don't get the whole part of this in the lectionary text, but we're told that like when the wise men don't go back and report to Herod, that then there's the slaughtering of the innocent, right, in Matthew's version of the gospel. And I can't help but think, right, that all of a sudden you have the Holy Family who become these refugees fleeing from violence, and how can you not read that, like this idea of Epiphany through the lens of the work that you do here? Like it just clicked for me, like, oh, this is exactly what you guys are doing, like y'all are living this on a day-to-day basis, and the work that you do is exemplified in the gospel here.
It really is. It's a very moving passage, and the idea that God chooses or chose to experience life as a refugee is something that we should take very seriously, and there's a reason Jesus in his very first sermon opens up Isaiah and talks about good news, that this is supposed to be good news for oppressed people, and is good news for oppressed people. And the other thing I want to say about that is the Holy Family flees for their lives, and it's difficult. I mean, they are going to a foreign place.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that gets lost when people talk about refugees is there's this idea that, well, people come here for a better life. Well, not some people do, but some people very reluctantly leave their homes, leave a place where they're comfortable with the language, and they leave situations. And I'm reminded of that Worcestershire poem, Home,
Yeah.
about, nobody leaves home unless home is the mouth of a shark.
Yeah.
And that's a reality we should think about, not to dwell on the bleakness of it, but just the desperation that drives people to leave, and the resilience and courage it takes to do that, to keep your family safe. So it's a privilege. I don't feel like I'm doing I definitely don't feel like I'm doing a good deed. I feel like doing this work is a privilege, and I'm inspired every week by our clients and their resilience and hard work and perseverance, and how the amount of gratitude they express for what they receive from us. It's very inspiring, uplifting work, and it keeps me keeps me motivated.
Yeah, it really is incredible. And I don't know enough about what you all do, and I'm excited to learn even more. And like I said, lean on you as we continue to, as a church, lean into this idea of church and society, and what does it mean to not just work on individuals' hearts, because I think that is often what people think of when they think of the church and what the role of religion is. And I think it is that, but it's not just that, right? And that there's this reality that transformation it comes at an individual level, but it also comes at a corporate level. And if we're not working on both, right, like the individual heart, but also policy and societal systemic issues and things like that, then we're never going to really bring about transformation at all.
Well, I mean, White Rock United Methodist is a great church, and they do a lot of great things in the community. But I have to say that I've been in my role as the executive director of HRI for in a couple of weeks, it'll be 9 years. And one of the things that's been very disappointing to me is how little the church has done to assist organizations like ours. And I used to say, this is a little less true, particularly because of First Methodist downtown. I used to say, when I talk to churches, I'd say, well, you guys always ask what you could do. And I say, well, you could do a toiletry drive for us. But my experience has been that bars are a lot more reliable than churches.
Nuh-uh.
And that's absolutely, well, it's true. First Methodist is put some not truth to that. They've actually done a really great couple toiletry drives for us, and that's been very useful. So when churches, I actually it makes an impression on me when churches step up and do things like that, because my experience has been they don't. Yeah. I'm sad to say, as a person who's a Methodist and a Christian, it's just been disappointing.
No, I appreciate that call. I think it's a good recognition of the reality of where we actually sit right now. And that's an important thing. So toiletry drives is one thing that people can do if they really want to help the work you're doing. Let us know what are some other things that people can do, both on a kind of individual level or a corporate level.
Well, actually, the most beneficial thing for people to do, for any organization, including ours, which is people are going, oh, I know what he's going to say, and I'm going to say it, is to help us financially.
Sure.
Because we use a lot of volunteers, but we're not using any volunteers in our office now. And we don't have a lot of places when we need lawyers, we need psychologists, we have a huge need for translators. We have been able to use lots of volunteer translators through this whole COVID experience, because that's stuff that you can do remotely, but you can't come into our office and interact with our clients. It's not safe to do that. Sure. So financial support, particularly if you pick a grassroots organization like ours, or JFON, Justice for Our Neighbors, which came out of the Methodist Church. Right. A little bit of money goes a long way with small organizations like that. And then I guess the other thing is actually kudos to you. It's just giving us an opportunity to talk about the work and inform people and educate people about it. That's actually a really big deal, and I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing I'm really committed to in 2021 is calling my senators regularly and my local officials as well. If I'm calling and advocating for immigration and stuff like this? What are some good things are some most relevant things to be talking about?
Well, there's there are refugee protection acts that are bills that have been sitting there for years now, that provide for protection for refugees. I'd say now there's some long-term things. For one thing, it's reforming our immigration courts.
Yeah.
It surprises people to know that our immigration courts are not part of the judiciary. They're part of the executive branch. So the immigration courts are subject to the political pressure of the president and the attorney general. And we've seen that very, very damaging things have happened in the last 3 years because of that. And so actually making the courts, reforming the courts where they're not subject to, they're part of the judicial branch like other courts, is a big long-term goal. To be honest, the thing I really would urge people to do right now is to put pressure on the new administration to undo some of the things that have been done in the last 3.5 years. There will be a temptation not to move fast. Yeah. And I think us being a voice of witness to the new administration, just like we were to the former administration, is really crucial. This will sound cynical, but that's what you get for inviting a lawyer to talk. I'm actually not super hopeful about law change. I just don't see our Congress having the stomach to change things. And so I think putting pressure on the executive branch to change policies, to undo some of the harm, like MPP that you mentioned, increasing our refugee numbers, having a real refugee solution at the border. Those are things the executive can do. Like, because have you been down to the border? Have you been to?
No, I was scheduled to go in April, which you can imagine didn't happen.
Yeah. I know my good brother Eric's been down there, and a lot of other.
Yep. I know Mitchell went, and our church went a couple.
He did. Okay.
Yeah, they went a couple.
And so anyone that went to the border realizes we're not treating that like a refugee crisis. Like a refugee crisis, you go to Sudan or Kenya or Ethiopia, there are refugee camps there. Right. That provided by the United Nations, and they're providing aid to people that are fleeing violence. And that's not what's happening in Mexico. These are just big, squalid, homeless camps, and the people have made the best of it. They've got some sidewalk schools, and they're trying their best, and there are people trying to even provide legal services to people in Mexico, despite how dangerous it is. But that's the number one thing I'd say to the administration is to treat this like the refugee crisis it really is.
Yeah, that's great. Well, Bill, where can people find you online if they're looking?
It's hrionline.org, and my contact information is on there. And it's been a real joy speaking to you today. And thank you for the opportunity to talk about this.
Absolutely.
Tie into scripture. That was really
yeah.
Great.
Well, and again, thanks for the work you're doing. We're really grateful for all that HRI does, and you especially. So,
thank you.
Friends, take a break here. We'll be back for worship in just a couple of minutes. Thanks for joining us this morning.